So welcome to today's webinar with Project FeederWatch, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm super excited to see how many people are interested in feeding birds this winter and maybe participating in Project FeederWatch. My name is Chelsea Benson, and I'm on the Visitors Center team at the Lab of Ornithology. And today I have with me Emma Greig, from the project leader at Project FeederWatch. So welcome, Emma. And
hi, thank you.
Yeah, and Holly Grant, a project assistant. So thanks to you both. I know it's a really busy time for you. FeederWatch just started, right? This weekend?
Yeah, last weekend. Whew. And it is a busy year, busiest one ever.
That's awesome. Congrats. So we are going to be chatting a lot, but before we get into that, I have some announcements. One of them is if you would like closed captioning, it's available. If you'd like to see subtitles, click on the captions button at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to ask Emma and Holly a few questions from the audience. So if you would like your question answered, you can type it into the Zoom's Q&A. So you'll see that Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. If you like somebody else's question in the Q&A, there's actually a thumbs up icon. So you can click on that and it brings the question to the top of our list so that we'll be sure to see it. We'll be answering a lot of questions verbally, or as many as we can. And we'll also be typing in our answers. One of my colleagues is behind the scenes and already responding in the Q&A. So you can check the answered column for those typed in answers. Also, I see our chat is very active on Zoom already. You can use that for tech support and sharing information with others, but we're not going to be checking it for questions. So please add your questions to the Q&A. And you'd also want to change it from panelists to panelists and attendees so that everybody can see your chat. For our Facebook audience, you can add your questions to the comments box, and we'll do our best to answer those as well. And please be aware that there's been some spam attempts on our Facebook. So if you see a link in the Facebook comments area, please do not click it unless it's from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So don't click any suspicious links from anyone else, just us. No suspicious links from us though. All right, so that was a lot of announcements. Let's get started. Emma, could you introduce yourself and give us an overview of what is Project FeederWatch?
Sure. So I'm the project leader of FeederWatch. I've been in this position for about 7 years now, and I've just grown to love FeederWatch so much over this time. And what FeederWatch is basically a winter bird counting effort where people across the US and Canada count the birds that come to their yards, usually they're bird feeders, and they enter their counts online, send them to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and we collect and organize all that data and then see what we can do with it, see what we learn from all of your observations.
And how many participants do you guys have on a typical season?
Usually about 20,000 people sign up across both the US and Canada.
That's awesome. And Holly, could you tell us about what your role is at FeederWatch and maybe give us some reasons why people might want to join the project?
Yeah, sure thing. So I've been working as a project assistant for the last couple of years here. Basically, my duties include I'm answering a lot of phone calls for FeederWatch. I'm answering a lot of the emails, keeping up with our social media pages, and a bunch of other little jobs, around our WordPress pages. And, pretty much if there's something that needs to be done, I'm there to help out with it. And then to join FeederWatch, people should join it because it's just plain fun. I mean, if you enjoy watching your backyard birds, why not watch them and have it be put to greater use in the world of science? Help us learn more about those birds that you're seeing every day.
That's awesome. So Emma, FeederWatch has been around for quite a while, right? This is your 34th season. Is that right?
Can you believe it? Yeah, 34 years. People have been counting birds following the same protocol for 34 years. It is really a fantastic data set because of that.
Can you tell us about what you've learned from that data set?
Yeah, and that I got to say it's a tough question in a way because there are dozens of scientific papers that have come out from FeederWatch data, so quite a lot, and there's no way to say it all now, but some themes that emerge, I would say, are that the birds in our backyards are very influenced by changes in climate, and the mild winters, more mild winters that we're seeing in some parts of the country are really starting to lead to more warm adapted species coming to backyards. So a lot of people may be noticing that in different places. We're also learning how important habitat is for birds. You know, forested areas, what you do in your backyard, it all matters. So those are some really broad themes. Now I have a little example of a particular study that we've done with FeederWatch data that I can show with a couple of slides if you'd like.
Yeah, I think that'd be really great to kind of illustrate something that you've learned from all these 20,000 people collecting data over the years.
Yeah, because the other things are very broad patterns, but we do have some, every paper has its own cool thing. So I'm gonna try and do a screen share. Let's see if I can do this and just share a couple of slides about a project that was started by, let's try share. Does that seem like it might be working?
You got it.
And then now, how do I turn it to a slideshow? Oh, does that look good for y'all? Yeah. So this was a little bit of research done by a postdoc who's now working in Macaulay Library named Elliot Miller. And he had this great idea of taking all of the, everyone's watching their backyard birds through FeederWatch, and we just count them normally. But he thought, well, what if we do a little more and start keeping track of how those birds interact with each other? And so now within FeederWatch, you can do more than just count. You can also record behavioral interactions. Well, so this, what I'm about to show you, is what we've learned from a couple years of behavioral interaction data. It's called Who's the Toughest Bird? So what I'm showing you now are, it's impossible to read all those little letters, but those are all species codes for all the different species that people saw interacting at their bird feeders. And they're ranked by dominance. So the more dominant species are at the top of this list, and the less dominant species that would get displaced at feeders are at the bottom. While it might not come as a great surprise that the more dominant species are bigger and the less dominant species are smaller. So I think I wanted to ask a little quiz to all our audience. This is part one of the quiz, and then there'll be a part two in a second. Who do you think is the toughest bird based on this? If the largest bird is the most dominant, and we're talking about backyard birds that come to bird feeders. Do folks have any guesses? I can't see the chat, so I have no idea.
People are guessing blue jays, a lot of blue jays, crows, starlings.
Oh, I like these guesses.
Lots of really good guesses. Woodpeckers, woodpecker species.
They're gonna love part two of this. Okay.
Magpies, another one.
Well, surprise, it's the turkey. This is just because they're so enormous. I know, and you're all probably like, that shouldn't count, but this is just a really straightforward ranking of basically biggest to smallest. Well, not quite smallest. So the smallest one, the least dominant, is the Eurasian tree sparrow. Not the house sparrow, but the Eurasian tree sparrow, which just is in the Midwest. So there's a little population of them there. So a little bit of a surprise. Okay, you're probably all wondering, what the heck? This doesn't mean anything. I know blue jays are the jerks at my feeder and turkeys are peaceful. Well, that's because we have to think about it a little more carefully and compare that ranking of most dominant to the mass of the bird and say, well, who's who's the meanest relative to their body size. So when taking into account the fact that, of course, if you're bigger, you're not going to get displaced. So if you look at this graph, what it tells you is that the birds above this line are birds who, for their mass, they're actually more aggressive than you would expect based on their body size. And look who it is. It's blue jays, red-bellied woodpeckers, grackles, so blackbirds. So actually, a lot of those guesses that people were making actually come from a very intuitive, like, they're right, those are really aggressive species. So I think it's so cool that this data set really illustrated stuff that we can kind of tell, we kind of know, but this quantified it. So the birds in the lower part are birds that are less dominant than you would expect for their size. Oops, now where's their picture? Bop, bop. There they are. So these are things like grosbeaks and mourning doves. What's more peaceful than a dove? So again, it kind of makes sense that what we think is the case is true. And so here, oops, the last little bit of this section, I'll just move my picture there. There's one bird that's a little bit, oops, shoot, I gave it away. Maybe not, maybe not. Here, you see the little red circle around that dot? And if you didn't notice, the bird that just popped up. What species do you think this is? It's really, really far away from that red line. So it's really aggressive for its body size. Take a guess in the chat. Does everyone, did they all see it?
Well, if they didn't, most of them are saying hummingbirds or wrens.
Oh, wrens.
Good guess too. Yeah.
Wren is a really good guess.
Yeah.
And hummingbird, it's a rufous hummingbird. It turns out even among hummingbirds, rufous hummingbirds are just real feisty little devils. So anyway, that's the story of, or one of the many stories of the sorts of things that we can learn from your FeederWatch counts. And I could actually go on and on, but with other stories, but I'm gonna stop. Let's see if I can stop screen sharing. How do I do that? New share, stop share. Did it stop?
Yep.
Okay.
That was really good. Thank you for sharing it. I know the hummingbirds, for being so tiny, they certainly pack a punch. They're very territorial over the feeders.
Yeah, they are very feisty.
And I wanted to ask you another question about FeederWatch, Emma. And I know that this year was really interesting with the pandemic. I know that you guys had some changes. And what did you do? And what did you learn from that?
Well, yeah, so what we did, normally the season ends in early April, but when we realized that folks were going to be stuck at home a lot more than usual this past spring, we extended the FeederWatch season through the end of April. And folks seemed very happy to have a little extra time to count their birds. And I mean, really, what's better than counting backyard birds when you can't really go out and do anything? So FeederWatch was perfect for this. And will continue to be perfect for it over this coming winter when we still have to spend a lot more time at home than we're used to. And what we learned was that if you keep the FeederWatch season open longer, well, you start to pick up on a lot of migrants that we normally miss because the season ends in early April. So folks were reporting all kinds of warblers and grosbeaks, orioles, all sorts of species that maybe we get a few little hints of them in the winter, but not nearly as much as we did this year. So it was really cool to see that. And I think really begs for us to start extending the season more. We're not quite ready, but we want to, we really want to.
That's good to know. I'm sure people would love to be able to count for longer, but. All right, so we received a lot of questions about bird feeding, but before we kind of switch gears into like feeding birds, Holly, I wanted to ask you if you could clarify for us, how exactly do you go about counting for FeederWatch? So what's the protocol that you guys use?
Yeah, sure thing. So when feeder watchers are conducting a count, what we ask them to do is they determine a count site. So some parameters, maybe the edge of their backyard, and they count this same count with the birds that come within this area every single time that they conduct a count throughout the season. So they have consistency there. And then when they do count, they're counting the highest number of each species seen simultaneously within their count site. So let's say you see 3 chickadees come to your feeder and all at the same time, and then they all fly away. And then maybe they come back and have 2 of their friends with them, so 5 chickadees. By the end of your 2 days counts, if that's the highest number you saw at one time, you'll report 5 for that species of chickadee.
Gotcha. And they don't have to be just at the feeder, right?
That's correct. Yep, they could. It's all up to you. So some people do use their count site as just birds that come to their feeders. Others, you know, the birds that come beneath their feeders, if there's plantings or, you know, special shrubs or berries that you've planted to attract birds, maybe bird baths that are nearby. So it's really up to you how big that count site is. And it's also up to you how long you want to count. So some people might count for maybe a couple minutes on day 1 and a couple minutes on day 2. Maybe they'll count on and off while they're doing chores all day. Some people I know, they'll just sit there and they'll watch for 4 straight hours. As long as you record how long you're actually watching your count site, you can report that later when you're actually submitting those counts to us.
Awesome. And what happens if they can't like get a good ID on a bird? Do you have any suggestions for ways that they might be able to figure out what that bird is and what they should do if they know it's like a sparrow, but they're not quite sure what kind of sparrow? Because those little brown birds are so tricky.
Oh, they so are. And especially with new participants who might not be as familiar with ID. So one of the best things that we can offer is the Cornell Lab has an app called Merlin. And you can, it's a really cool app that helps you, it just asks you, I think it's 5 questions, where you are, the date, and then some questions about the bird. And it'll give you a list of possible options. So that's a great place to start. You can also use some of our tips online. We have one of our web pages is got information on tricky bird IDs, how to tell the difference between birds that are really difficult to tell apart, sort of like chipping sparrows and American tree sparrows and things like that, you know, there's just a hair of a difference between them. And then very worst case, if you still are just totally out of luck, we have 2 more options. One of them, when you're reporting your count online, there's a little button that says add species, and you can add a generic species name to your list. So let's say you see a sparrow, it's hopeless, you can't tell what species it is, but you know you saw 3 of them. You can go into your count, use that add species button, and then type in sparrow with a SP and a period right after it. So that tells us, okay, you know it's a sparrow species, but you just can't identify it any closer than that. So you can select that, add it to your count, and then add a number 3 next to it if you saw 3 of them. Okay. So we have that for sparrows, hawks, flycatchers, a few key birds. And then your final option is just to email us. If you're all out of luck and you're just not sure what to do next, give us an email, send a photo if you can, and we'll help you out.
Yes, definitely. And I saw people are asking if Merlin is free. And yes, Merlin is a free app. And it's also, there's a web-based version too. So you can use the web-based version, which is on allaboutbirds.org. And there's a section called Bird ID. So you can go there, and that's a really great way to narrow it down. And if you really can't get it, thank goodness for you, Holly, and Anne Marie, the other assistant, who are excellent at bird ID on photographs. So that's super helpful to know. All right, a couple more questions about counting. Now, Emma, some people are wondering if they can tell the difference between a male and female. Like cardinals are really, you know, easy to tell the difference. But like a mourning dove or a blue jay, it's just impossible by looking at them to know if it's male or female. Like, how do you count the males, the ones that you can tell apart and the ones that you can't?
Oh boy, everyone's gonna be mad about this answer, but you are supposed to count all the different species in the same way. I know that sometimes we know more about some species than others, but it's kind of like, since we want to treat all the species the same, you got to go with the lowest common denominator, which is like a chickadee, where you can't tell the males from the females. I'm sorry. It's just, it makes all of the different species more comparable in analyses. So that's why I know it seems frustrating, it seems wrong, but remember, you're just sampling anyway. You're just taking a little snapshot of what's in your yard. So you're never really counting every single bird that's in your yard. So yeah, if you had bring yourself to follow the protocol, it's the best.
I was going to say too, so just to clarify, if you see a male cardinal come to your feeders just by himself, he flies away, and then a female comes, you know it's two different birds, but the highest number you saw simultaneously was just one bird. So you're going to put one next to northern cardinal.
Okay. Yeah, it's important that, I mean, it seems like you said counterintuitive, but it's super important that the data is all collected in the same way. So thank you for clarifying that. Sorry, the audience, if you didn't like the answer.
This is the most controversial thing we will talk about today.
I know. So Holly, sometimes birds come in really like large flocks to the feeder, like the blackbirds species often come in huge groups.
Oh yeah.
And it's frenetic. The ground is just like jumping around with birds. And so what's your suggestion for being able to like count that crazy group of birds on the ground or at the feeders?
Yeah, sure thing. So this is something we call blocking. You basically take a small section of those birds and you count how many are in that small section. Just kind of say, all right, there's about 10 birds, right? And then use that to estimate the flock size, kind of superimpose that image in your mind on that whole flock to see if you can estimate that total flock size. And then that's the number that you should use. So what I would recommend is trying this out on your non-FeederWatch count days to get a hang of it. And then when it does happen in real life, you'll be ready.
Yeah, and people in real life, like pine siskins is another species that often comes in large groups and just is tricky. But yeah, if you're practicing and counting smaller groups and trying to apply it across, like it does help. It obviously you're not going to get an exact number, but as you're doing your best, and that's all we can do. Emma, you touched on this briefly. A lot of people are working from home right now. And, you know, I know that I spend half my day upstairs at my dining table, and I have feeders right next to my porch off the dining area. And so like, I'm, you know, checking my feeders throughout the day. How would you go about, like, if your count day, you're like kind of looking periodically, do you just try to like add up your like 10-minute chunks you were watching as far as like your total time? What's your suggestion there?
Yeah, the idea of the amount of time you watch is just estimate really how much time you're looking out the window, whether it's continuous or interrupted.
Okay.
The main thing is try to guess, well, this is how much time I actually spent looking out the window. Because the amount of time people spend watching their feeders is very much associated with how many birds they see. The longer you spend watching, the more opportunity you have to see more birds. And so that's why it's really important that folks record that information about how much time they spend watching and do it consistently. Great.
All right, we just have a couple more FeederWatch questions, and then we're going to switch to bird ID and like bird feeder questions. So Emma, will FeederWatch counts be available in eBird? Do they communicate at all?
They communicate a little bit in that they're all stored in the same database. They use the same taxonomy. Because the FeederWatch protocol is over a 2-day period, it doesn't match up with any eBird protocols for counting. So you don't actually see your FeederWatch counts in your eBird counts. Because the protocols are different also, anyone who comes in to use the data would analyze them separately. So there's the answer to that, I think.
And, you know, a lot of people want to know why only winter, but we kind of already touched on that, and that you would hope to expand, but it's more of a capacity issue with being a smaller team at the Lab of Ornithology and the tech involved in expanding a season. But people also want to know, like right now, we're based, if you know, it's with the Lab of Ornithology in the United States and Birds Canada in Canada. Would you ever hope to expand geographically?
Oh, I would love to so much. I mean, a lot of the birds that we have in our backyards spend their winters in Mexico. So we're not really capturing or further south in South America even. So we don't capture the entire life cycle of a lot of birds with the counting that we do. But, you know, we're doing the best we can now. And as we build capacity through time, I would hope very much to be able to expand geographically. There's so much that we want to do, though, that it's, you know, everything takes, you got to prioritize everything. So yeah, someday.
All right, folks in the audience, we're going to shift gears away from talking about FeederWatch specifically and talk more about backyard birds and tips for feeding birds. So Holly, you mentioned that there's a place to find tricky bird IDs, and one of our audience members pre-submitted a question, and they're wondering how to tell the difference between a house finch and a purple finch, because that is tricky. And he's been thinking he's misidentifying. So would you pull up the page that you mentioned and kind of walk us through how to use that tricky ID page?
Yeah, absolutely. We have got a page that will definitely help this person. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, is that coming through all right?
Sure is.
All right, so this is the FeederWatch homepage, nice big blue banner. And what we're going to do is we're going to go under the Learn tab. You can see there's a whole bunch of great stuff here. And we're going to move over to this Tricky Bird ID column. So we have a whole bunch here that help you tell the difference between some commonly misidentified birds, like downy woodpeckers, hairy woodpeckers, sharp-shinned versus Cooper's hawks. We're going to click on the cassins, house, and purple finch. So when this web page opens up, you'll see we have this really great guide that opens up with the 3 males of those species, and below a couple of different field marks that help set them apart. So for example, the difference between house finches and purple finches, like this person was asking, house finches have a rounded head with a smooth crown, whereas purple finches have a fairly large head, and sometimes their crown can appear peaked. You can see a little bit of a difference in their coloration there too, how purple finches are a little bit more raspberry colored. Their bills are just a little bit of a different shape. One of the great things you can do is click on one of these rows and it'll specifically show you examples of that field mark. So here you can see that rounded head for the house finch and the crests on the purple finch there. And again, with the coloring, we've got some more examples on the bottom. Let's click that again to get rid of it. And up here, we also have female field marks. So you can see the difference between the females, a chance to learn more about these species. We have the sounds, so you can play the sounds and see if the birds are singing at your feeders. You can kind of use these to tell the difference. If you scroll down, they're in a horizontal format here. And then range maps. So if you're seeing a bird at your feeders that looks like one of these, and let's say you live in Utah, you're probably not going to see the purple finch because purple finches don't live in Utah, but house finches and cassins finches do. So that's one of the many pages there under that Learn tab that I think are helpful for folks.
Actually, could you open that back up while you have your screen share there? A lot of people are asking about how to decide what kind of feeders and foods to put out to attract certain birds. And on the webpage, I know you have a really cool interactive, and I would love if you could walk people through it so that they could figure out how to attract different birds to their places.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is one of my favorite things to offer to people. Again, we're on the Learn tab. So we have this feeding birds section and as well as the Common Feeder Birds Interactive. So we're going to start here, the Common Feeder Birds Interactive. This is a really cool tool we have. It shows you every common species of bird that arrives to feeders. So it doesn't have every single species, but everyone, all the common ones that people typically report to us. So first you can use these filters on the left-hand side to filter your region. So let's say the Northeast, and that'll shrink this list of birds down to those that have arrived to feeders in the Northeast. Your food type here, you can switch between different food types. So let's say you have a feeder with black oil sunflower seeds, or even cracked corn. You can see the birds that will come to your feeder if you provide that kind of food. And then down here is feeder type. So if you're in the Northeast and you provide black oil sunflower seeds on the ground, these are the birds that are most likely to come to your feeder setup. So that's one of the ways you can use this tool. One of the other ways, I'm going to reset all of these here, you can use the reset buttons, is let's say you have a bird that you really want to see at your feeders. You are just dying to see evening grosbeaks. I know it's a big year for them this year. A lot more people are seeing them than normal. So if you click on that species picture, and you scroll down, you have all of their information right there. So you can see, all right, they typically come to feeders in the Northeast, the Southwest, and the Northwest. This year you might see them in the Southeast as well. They come to feeders that are stocked with sunflower seeds, whether they have their shells on or not. And the best way to attract them is to use a large tube feeder, a large hopper feeder, or a platform feeder. And then at the bottom, you can use the All About Birds link here if you want to learn even more about the species. So it's a super cool tool. I love recommending it to people when they're when they ask me, you know, I want to set up a feeder, my feeders, and I want to attract, you know, species A, B, and C. I give them this tool and they can use it to inform their purchases and then arrange their feeder site in a way that's going to attract the birds that they really want to see.
That's really great, because I know that sometimes when you go to the store, it can be really overwhelming because there's so many different types of seed and feeders. So if you kind of use this tool before you go, you'll have a good idea of what you might want to purchase.
Exactly. And, you know, there's other birds too here. Let's open up like an American crow. They eat pretty much everything. So if you want to get crows at your feeder, you've got a whole bunch of options. All right. Is there anything else you'd like me to show on the website?
Nope, that's great. Thank you so much.
Cool.
All right. So Emma, do you have any tips for creating a safe feeder environment? People are asking about like window strikes, like what's a good distance to put your feeder and like cleaning them. So we want to attract birds to our yards because they're so beautiful, but it's tragic to see anything negative happen. So what are some steps that people can take to kind of mitigate some issues that they might have by having bird feeders out?
Yeah, that's a great question. And two of the biggest harms that befall birds who come to bird feeders are window strikes and cats. So keeping your cats indoors really does help. And keeping bird feeders close to windows actually helps. It seems counterintuitive, but the reason for that is that if a bird is at a feeder and gets spooked and flies into your window, if the feeder is really close to the window, it doesn't have a time to get enough speed to really harm itself. So I think even as close as a meter, 3 feet is thought to be about the safest distance from a window. Other things though that you can do to have a safe feeder environment are things like don't use pesticides in your yard. Try to nurture the nature that can just grow and thrive around your yard. The more bugs you have, the more insects, the better it is for birds, not just feeder birds, but any birds that might come to your habitat. Leaving your yard a little bit messy. You don't have to rake up all those leaves. You don't have to burn all of your twigs. Leave a brush pile, leave an area for the towhees and the fox sparrows to scratch around in as they're moving through. If you can stand it, it's really good for birds. So that's some tips for that.
What about cleaning feeders? Do you have any advice about what's the best way to like clean a feeder or how often you clean them?
Yeah, if you have feeders that can come apart easily and you can stick them in the dishwasher now and then, that's a good thing to do. What do we recommend cleaning frequency, Holly? I can never remember this stuff.
So generally we recommend cleaning them once every week or two. So it sounds really frequent, but you know, some studies have been done on the diseases that can be transferred on feeders. They say, you know, when you're cleaning your feeder, make sure you're scrubbing all of that debris off the feeder. And we also recommend, if you can, soaking your feeder in a bleach solution, a weak bleach solution for about 10 minutes to an hour, which can really help reduce viral and bacterial loads on there that could get passed on to birds.
Yeah, I guess the way or I've heard this said before, where it's like if you're having a dinner party, you want to provide your guests with clean dishes and nice food and a nice ambiance that's safe. So this is what we also want to do with the space that we create for birds.
And if you notice your seed is getting a little moldy or kind of wet too, it might be, you know, keep an eye on it. And if you're seeing mold pop up, discard it and discard it, clean your feeders and then refill.
Yeah, you wouldn't feed that to guests. No.
I love that. Keep your guests happy. A lot of people are interested in using all different things besides just seed and suet and like peanuts. Some people are asking about like attracting other birds with like mealworms or fruit. Do you guys have any suggestions? Like a lot of people are interested in bluebirds specifically. What are your thoughts on how to attract a bluebird?
Well, they do love mealworms. That's my understanding about bluebirds. What else? Well, putting out some bluebird boxes doesn't hurt too if you live in a place where they'll nest. But that's a little fun for the springtime when FeederWatch ends. I'm trying to think. What other ideas are there, Holly, for?
There's oranges and grape jelly are always a great way in the springtime if you have orioles coming through your area. Orioles, catbirds. I even saw a robin at my oranges and grape jelly this spring. It's a nice little fruity treat. I think red-bellied woodpeckers like to come to that sometimes too.
Oh yeah, so you get a lot of stuff, including probably bluebirds, just with a couple of oranges. Yeah. Oh yeah, good.
Yeah, it might be tricky, like if you live in a climate that freezes in the winter months, of course, to put out like fresh fruits and jellies because they're gonna solidify pretty quickly. But if you live in a warmer climate, it's a really great idea to attract other birds. Of course, keeping an eye on making sure they don't attract too many pests or get moldy, obviously, like we were just talking about, is really important as well. What about, Holly, could you talk about providing water and the importance of water for birds during the wintertime?
Yeah, absolutely. So water attracts birds just like seed does. The birds do still need to, they like to take their baths, they like to have water in their diets, obviously. So one of the good things you can do in the wintertime is buy a bird bath heater. Or I think we have a tip on our website too about using an upturned flower pot with like a heat lamp underneath it, or
cool.
even just a light bulb that's on can keep the dish of water that might be set on top of that warm enough. A sprayer can also help, or a dripper that helps the water not appear smooth as glass. It looks like it's moving around a bit. That can attract birds as well. I think you can hang a bucket with a little hole poked on the bottom, and if the water will drip out in little droplets into like a pan or a shallow dish. That can help be attractive to birds. And then especially, so having a bird bath for birds is great, but it can be either on the ground or it can be raised, but you're gonna wanna probably make sure that it's shallow and that you're changing the water every day. So it's fresh, it's clean, you're not letting it get too mucky or gross. And adding a couple rocks in that as well to give them a space to stand can also be helpful. But just make sure you never add antifreeze. It sounds simple, but we've had the question, never add anything extra to prevent that water from freezing.
Toxic is bad. All right, so we have lots of questions about discouraging other feeder visitors, because while we put out feeders and we get birds and things that we love, they can also attract things that we're not animals that we're not so excited about. So we're gonna do a little lightning round. So I know, get ready. So I'm going to say your name and an unwanted feeder visitor, and you're gonna do your best to give some advice to our audience about how to discourage those feeder visitors. I will just start by saying, sometimes there's no way to discourage them. Like some are just gonna, and everybody knows what I'm talking about right now. So Holly, let's start with you because we're talking about squirrels. Go.
Squirrels. Yep. So squirrels, there's no 100% way to get rid of squirrels at your feeders. However, baffles added to your feeder pole can help. Providing food in a location that's a little bit farther away from your feeders, that's at ground level, that distracts them from your feeders, can also help. And we even had somebody who was ingenious. They hung their feeders on a clothesline and then strung that line with soda bottles. So the squirrels that were trying to climb along would fall off. The soda bottles would spin and they couldn't access it. So there's not a lot of great ways to avoid them, but you can try a few different ways and keep them at bay as long as you can.
And sometimes it's hilarious. I've tried the soda bottle thing and like watched them spin, but sometimes they can get by it anyway. And then it's like they earned that seed. I just have to hand it to them. And I actually have a feeder that's on a spring so that the ports close if something heavy lands on it. And that's been pretty helpful for me. So if you're in the audience, sometimes the spring-loaded feeders can work, but not always. All right, Emma, you're next. Bear.
Oh no, bears.
Bears.
Take your feeders down until they go into hibernation. Maybe you know how when you go camping, you hang up your food in a bear bag? Maybe there's a way you could string a rope really super, super high and hang your feeder from that. I don't know.
And we're not experts on mammals, so I would honestly reach out to like your game commission or the DEC is what we have in New York State, and ask them about when bears are hibernating typically in your area, because it's so geographically different. But yeah, no, we don't want bears getting used to feeders. Like that's just a bad combination for them and for people. All right, let's see. Holly, deer.
Deer. Let's see. I actually think this is kind of similar. We, take your feeders in at night if they're coming only at night. That works for pretty much any mammalian visitor that's coming to your feeders. You can hang them or keep them out of the deer's reach, or add baffles to kind of help prevent their access. But yeah, they're kind of another difficult one, unless you have a fence around your yard, really.
Yeah, you could try to fence. All right, Emma, we have some people that are in more urban environments that are putting out bird feeders. Mice and rats.
Oh man, how do you get rid of those guys? I guess you got to have feeders that don't spill seeds all over the place. That's my best. That's
no mess blend.
Yeah, a no mess blend. That's what I was thinking, Holly. So can you tell people what that is?
Yeah, so no mess blends are basically blends of birdseed that are full of seeds without their shells on them. So they're hulled already. The birds aren't going to discard those pieces that they're not going to eat. They're going to eat everything that's in the bag. So that helps reduce the mess that falls down on the ground. If you do have anything that falls on the ground, you can use a rake to rake that up as well too. You kind of have to keep up with it pretty regularly though if you've got ground visitors.
Yeah,
that's
mammals. A tricky one because they're just so small and they fit everywhere, get everywhere. But there are ways to, a lot of this is trial and error, right? You have to try to figure it out what's going to work for where you live. All right, last one. Emma, house sparrows.
Oh God, no, you picked me for house sparrows.
Gotcha.
I don't know. What can you do? Okay. If you hang a feeder, or you have a feeder where the birds have to hang on it in order to get to the seeds, house sparrows don't really love hanging on stuff. So that's a way to discourage them. You can also just get used to them. These are other animals that come into your yard, and house sparrows are on the decline. So the poor little guys, maybe they need a little treat now and then. So there's my other little suggestion is just,
and maybe people don't know that we want to expand on that a little bit, how we know that house sparrow populations are declining, because I think that might strike people as really.
Yeah, actually we know in part from FeederWatch data. So we can see the decline in house sparrows by looking at all of your counts over the past several decades. And yeah, we have a paper coming out about it soon, and in the last issue of Winter Bird Highlights we have a little article about it, so you can tune in and read all about house sparrow declines in North America. So don't be so mad at the poor little things, they're struggling.
I'll put in a little tidbit too for anybody who's at their wits' end with any animal that's coming to their feeders. For FeederWatch, you don't necessarily have to provide birdseed. You can still count birds within your count site if it's just the plantings or the water. So if you really don't want to attract any birds because that come to your feeders because of that food, don't provide food, and then you can just watch the birds that come to your shrubs, your trees, your berry producing things, your bird baths, and that still counts for FeederWatch.
Yep.
It totally does. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Chelsea.
No, I was just saying creating that bird-friendly habitat is a great substitute. So if you're just in an area where it's not possible, or you're getting too many unwanted guests, then that's a great idea, Holly. All right, so our Q&A is bumping. Thank you all so much for answering, putting all these questions in there, and we're barely dipping in. So I'm kind of perusing the questions now, and something that people want to know about is whether or not birds become dependent on feeders. And like, can feeders impact migration, especially for like hummingbirds or typical migrants? Emma, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, these are really good questions. I think it's kind of two questions: dependency, and then how does it affect migration?
Yeah.
From what we know, most of the time, the birds coming to our bird feeders have a lot of different food sources. So you may think you're super special, but they're probably also getting food from other places. And that's part of how these birds have been able to evolve and live in temperate climates. If they just relied on one food source, that would be a very tenuous existence for cold weather species, especially. So typically, no, birds don't become dependent on feeders. The only exception to this is when times are really, there's a really big snow or a really severe cold snap. That is when we start to see an effect of feeders on survival. So if there's an effect of feeders on survival, it means if they didn't have feeders in those really, really tough times, they might perish. Now, if you want, I don't know if you would call that dependency, but it's a time when feeders can really make a difference for birds.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other question about migration is, the answer is actually a little bit counterintuitive. So birds are triggered to migrate based on a lot based on temperature and daylight, the photo period. So they know, okay, it's time for me to go. And sometimes they will not travel if they're in really poor condition. So providing food for migrating birds can actually encourage them to keep on their merry way and keep going. They can come, fuel up, get a little snack, and move on. So the birds that stick around because you have bird feeders out and don't migrate, sometimes we see individual birds doing that. They probably weren't going to go anywhere anyway, and they just might not have survived at all if they didn't have your feeders to stay at. So it's it's a kind of nuanced thing to think about, but I think it's cool, the interaction between people and birds and the environment. It's all so connected in really cool ways.
That's really great. Thanks for, and you have learned a little bit about that with the Anna's hummingbird. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. So Anna's hummingbirds are a West Coast hummingbird that over the past, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 many decades has been expanding their winter range north. So these little hummingbirds will now overwinter in British Columbia. You'll see an Anna's hummingbird in the snow in your backyard. And I mean, it's totally crazy. From FeederWatch data, we can see, and I do think this is one of the amazing things about the repeated counts people make at their feeders, we can start to actually understand a bit about bird behavior based on how often a species will come to your feeder. And what we've learned is that Anna's hummingbirds that live in more northern latitudes are more, if you happen to get lucky enough to have one in your yard, you're more likely to see that bird on any given day that you do your FeederWatch count if you live in a colder place, which tells me that those northern latitude hummingbirds are using feeders more regularly. So it kind of seems like feeders might be allowing them to expand their range. And in a way that's true, but Anna's hummingbirds are not a typical migratory hummingbird to begin with. They have funny little local movement patterns that we don't really understand super well, but they're not long distance migrants. So it's an example of a hummingbird that is expanding its winter range, probably in part due to feeders. But I don't know that I would go so far as to say that feeders are preventing them from migrating, because they don't have an inclination to migrate in the first place.
Yeah.
So they're predisposed to stick around through the winters. But again, this is an interaction between birds and people. And well, the last little cool thing about it is that we know from FeederWatch data that not only are there more Anna's hummingbirds in the Pacific Northwest in winter now than in the past, there are also more people putting out hummingbird feeders. So we can see a change in human behavior, perhaps in response to these hummingbirds sticking around.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah, if I saw a hummingbird in my yard, I would be way more inclined to put out more feeders, which mean more hummingbirds.
Exactly. There's this cool interaction between people and birds in so many different ways. And this is one more cool example of that.
So I'm cruising through our Q&A, and I'm noticing, Holly, there's a lot of questions about how to count and count sites. Like, how is it just like my feeder, or is it like the telephone poles behind my house? And there's a lot of nuance to these questions. And if you could show us where people can go on the FeederWatch page so that they can kind of get answers to these questions, because unfortunately we can't go through them all. There's so many.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go back to the FeederWatch homepage here so I can show you all how to get to it. And then in case it hasn't been mentioned, it's feederwatch.org. So if anybody goes onto the website, that's the one you go to. So anybody, whether or not you're signed up for FeederWatch or not, you can go under the About tab here. You can learn about the project with our overview and our how to participate. But the really important one that I think these people are trying, that's going to help these people with the nuanced questions, is our detailed instructions. So detailed instructions, this is the same information that comes in a FeederWatch kit. The instructional handbook, it's pretty much just digitized here. You can use any of these topics here to click on a topic and it'll jump you right down to that part, the further explanation farther down on the page. So when you're wondering about how to choose your count days, you can click on that and it'll give you all that information right here. So again, 2 consecutive days, no more than once a week, usually about 5 days apart between those 2 days there. So I definitely suggest anybody who has these nuanced questions, go in, read over our instructions, maybe a couple times if it's a lot of information. And if you still have questions about that, then you can send us an email and I'd be happy to explain things further.
And I know that FeederWatch has an app now for doing counts on. So if you're submitting online, most of the time you tell people to submit their 2-day count at the end of their 2-day count.
Right.
If they're using the app, is it the same thing or is it different?
So it's a little bit different. So the instructions are still the same in terms of how to count and where you should be counting. But the app is a replacement for our paper tally sheets. So if you prefer to keep track on paper, we have in those instructions, there is a spot where you can download a paper tally form, print it out, keep track on, by hand. But there's also a link to our FeederWatch app, which when you open it up, you can start a count right in the app and then tap on the pictures of the birds to tally them. And then when you're done tallying after those 2 days, it'll save your count throughout those 2 days. You hit the submit and it goes directly to FeederWatch. If you have your paper tally sheet, you have to later go on to feederwatch.org and transfer all those counts you made with a paper and pencil onto our website. Right. So it's different. The app can do it all in real time. The FeederWatch website just has you enter it all at the very end of your count. So I hope that's clear.
Yeah. That's great. I love that you guys have an app now to be able to do that. How very modern. So a lot of people are asking if this is being recorded. Yes, we are recording this webinar. It's automatically going to archive on Facebook. So if you want to see this recording immediately or share it with somebody, if you go to the Cornell Labs Facebook page, it will be available in their videos section. For everybody on Zoom who's watching, you will be emailed a recording of this by tomorrow with some of the resources that we've been talking about. So look for that. It will be up. We're definitely recording and we want to be able to share this with other people who couldn't attend, or if you are watching and want to share it with somebody, you'll be able to either through Facebook immediately or wait until you get that email from me tomorrow. All right, so we're gonna go, let's see. There's another question, Emma, about eBird. And so people are wondering if we know that the data is different. The way you're counting is different. And so the data is not connected, but if they were submitting their FeederWatch count, can they also add their counts to eBird? So like, let's say they were watching their feeders, they counted for you, they added their data. Could they also add it to eBird, or is that not preferred? What's the best way to go about that?
Well, so I think the complicating thing is that the FeederWatch protocol is over this 2-day window. And I think the longest count window that eBird allows is a 24-hour one. So I think that's the only reason why it might not make sense to put your FeederWatch counts into eBird. But I mean,
it's also important because for FeederWatch, you're counting the highest number seen at one time. So again, with that cardinal example, right? You see a female and it leaves, and then a male comes. For FeederWatch, you're reporting one bird or one cardinal. But if you were making an eBird count, you would be reporting 2 separate birds, because for eBird, you're counting every single bird you see within one continuous count. So the counting is a little bit different. You can definitely submit an eBird count when you're you can submit it on the same day as a FeederWatch count, but I wouldn't copy an eBird count to FeederWatch or copy a FeederWatch count to eBird. You would want to count them in their own way according to their own unique protocols.
Great, thank you. So I got a softball for you. I know these have been hard-hitting questions this webinar. What's your favorite feeder bird? People want to know, what bird do you love to see at a feeder, or do you hope to see, or maybe both?
well, I got mine on my t-shirt here. It's the Gouldian finch. Can you all see this beautiful finch? They're Australian though, so I
and I like a lot of different birds at my feeders. One of my favorites to see is a Carolina wren, only because they don't come to my feeders very often. I have 1 or 2 that live nearby, but you might see them only once or twice a month. And of course, this year I'm hoping for pine siskins and evening grosbeaks like everybody else in town is seeing, but they haven't come to my feeders yet. So
I know that I've had a red-breasted nuthatch at my feeder for the last few weeks, and it's so cute. I just love it. And it's aggressive, as we were talking about at the beginning of the webinar. It's like one of the ones that chases the other birds away. But I love seeing that bird at the feeder. It's just because it's like Holly, it's not one that I get to see all the time. So when I do get to see it, it's super special. All right, so we had tons of great questions from everybody. Emma, could you remind people, if they are interested in signing up for FeederWatch, how to go about doing that?
Yeah, the easiest way to do it is to go to the website, feederwatch.org, and then there's a big red button that guides you to the join page. So just click on through that and you can sign up whether you're in the US or in Canada, and there you go. You'll be all set.
And they can start as soon as they sign up?
They can start right away. You could even start counting before you sign up if you want to, and then enter your counts after you sign up.
Retroactively add them.
Mm-hmm.
And Holly, I heard that there's a photo contest going on at the same time as the FeederWatch season. Could you tell us more about that contest and how our audience might get involved, even if they're not a photographer?
Yes, absolutely. So the bird spotter contests, many of you may remember this from previous years, but we're doing it again this year. The biggest part of the bird spotter contest is the photo contest. So you can submit a photo. We've got 8 categories that run for about 2 weeks for each category. Right now, our first category is called birds with food or at the feeder. So if you have a picture of a bird with food or at a feeder, submit it, and we will pick some winners at the end of next week. There's a judge's choice that Emma and I will pick, and a people's choice. So there's a voting button for all of the birds, a voting button for all the pictures that are in that gallery. Vote for your favorites, and we will award the person with the most votes the prize for each category. And at the end, we take all of these weekly winners and put them in a grand prize contest. So that's the biggest part. We also have a data entry contest. So when you submit data to FeederWatch, this is just for participants. The bird spotter contest for photos is open to anybody. But the data entry side is when you finish entering your count on the website, there'll be a little button that pops up and asks you to tell us a story according to one of our prompts. So that will pop up as soon as you're done submitting a count. And then we also have a third part of the bird spotter contest for classrooms. So I just posted something actually on our Facebook page, the FeederWatch Facebook page today. announcing the FeederWatch in the Classroom contest. If you participate with your class, if you're a teacher and educator, fill out the form and we will pick a few random winners over the course of the season to highlight on our blog and our Facebook page. So a lot of information. Go to the FeederWatch website and under the community tab, you'll find our bird spotter contest with all these details all written out for you.
Great, thank you so much. That's a really exciting way to get people involved in not only counting their birds, but submitting stories about what they see and learn about FeederWatch, and also having kids involved. That's super fun.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, it is 1 o'clock. I want to thank Emma and Holly so much for joining us today. And good luck with the rest of the FeederWatch season. I hope that this has generated a lot of interest and that people sign up and get involved if they aren't already. I know we have a lot of FeederWatchers watching right now, so that's really great too. If we didn't get to your questions today, and I know we didn't get to all of them or even many of them, you can email us and ask your questions. So for general questions about bird ID or programs at the lab, you can email cornellbirds@cornell.edu. And I'll be emailing you these addresses later today too. So cornellbirds@cornell.edu. And if you have a FeederWatch question, it's pfwonline@cornell.edu. So FeederWatch questions and any bird questions, we are happy to help try to answer those. And remember to sign up for FeederWatch if you haven't already. And so Emma and Holly, thanks again. This was so fun. And thanks to our audience.
Yes, thank you so much for doing this. And it has been fun. And I'm so glad to see so much enthusiasm about backyard birds. I just think that's so great.
Same here. It's been a pleasure.
All right. And thanks everyone for watching, and happy feeder watching, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.